Okay, hello everyone. My name is Daniel, and this is my brother Nick. We are brothers, and we are engaging in our first podcast episode entitled "Into the Void." We are not. Let me just preface this right off the bat. We are not experts in at anything. We have zero certificates, degrees. Well, I have an associate's, but that doesn't pertain to anything we're about to talk about. The whole goal of this podcast, of what we set out to achieve, is just talking about and discussing just the abnormal, the weird, the paranormal, the mysterious, the disturbing, and the not so normal topics, I guess you could call it, of just dissecting and deciphering all different kinds of stuff that people that really don't like to talk about this kind of stuff because it's too hard. So we are two white guys that are going to be talking about some really white stuff. So grab your popcorn, grab your snacks, because we're about to get really weird. So, what is the topic of discussion that we're looking to get into on our first episode, Nick?
I think that was a pretty good introduction, and it looks like you're kind of in the void at this point. So
I
we'll
got that
see how
blue
that
lighting one.
the ambiance. So
Mm, mm.
yeah, since it's called Into the Void, I feel like we could definitely start talking about the void and what
Mhm.
that even means, the mysteriousness behind it, if it exists. I feel like there's so many different directions, and I feel like it's been incorporated into a lot of our or different societal either like episodes like TV, could be movies, like video games, and it was approached in a lot of different directions. And I feel like we could use our critical thinking to expand from there. Um, but if you want to start off, well, let's start off easy
Mm.
with
Level one.
SpongeBob. Level one level stuff
Oh yeah,
is
let's start at
where
no
we all
other better
started.
place. The beginning, SpongeBob.
Where I feel like, and that's the thing. It was so strange. So obvious, what we're talking about is Squidward being in the void. They were doing time travel. They went to the future. Everything was chrome.
What was the name of that episode? It was like SB like something. It was like a code or something like that.
It was something like that. Like I don't know, 3187 or something like that.
Yeah.
Some far off number. So yeah, they had. I don't know. Did Sandy create the time machine or something? So then they went to the future. They went back into the past, and it got screwed up.
Hmm.
And then he just ended up in the void, just a
Hmm.
white space. And I feel like as a kid you're
Floating
like,
like
what is
shape
even what is
things.
this? What is this? But looking back, I should probably rewatch the episode. But I feel like, I mean, depending on how old you are, we're in our later 20s. Um, but that's probably the first introduction to the void, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah. I would say that would be my first encounter with the void, I guess you could say. Probably speaking for a lot of people, of just it was just a scene that to this day I still think back to every so often, because it's so out of place, and it's such because it's a children's TV show, and like you don't they don't tackle subjects like that. It's always like lighthearted, very straightforward timelines and storylines to like keep up with. They can't confuse them too much, and then you come across a scene like this that's just like it was like a throwaway scene. Like kids wouldn't know how to process it. It was just like, oh, that's kind of weird. But like when you start delving more and more into it, it actually grows like terrifying in a way. Like it's
Hmm.
almost like a certain like a an interpretation of hell almost. That it's a place that we're not supposed to be. It's just it's like you're in between boundary lines almost, and just being like trapped there, that sounds just that is so otherworldly. Like that has to be absolutely terrifying because it's a place we're not supposed to be, and it's not even supposed to be a place. It feels like you've infiltrated a like a virus or something, and that you're just like
Mm.
stuck in a space of just color JPEGs, or you're amongst NFTs, and then you're just in a world that doesn't exist, but you do. But you're in a world that doesn't exist, and you're existing in an almost non-existence, and that's crazy to think about. Of how much more in depth that could get. The more you think about it, it's like the more
Hmm.
scarier it gets.
That's the thing. Like you were saying, it's basically a space between spaces. It doesn't exist. Going back to like, nothing makes sense. There was no physics behind it.
Mhm.
Nothing, and so like what Squidward was again. We're having a serious conversation with SpongeBob. Um, so but when he was there, he was like the voices were like like coming from nowhere, just echoes. There were shapes that he lifted up, and they just like disappeared into nothing.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned that it could think about a place like hell,
Mhm.
you could think of it like that. I mean, being mental, if you're conscious in that situation, that's horrifying. Of
Mhm.
there's no beginning, there's no end. Like, how'd you get there? Is there even a way to get out?
Mhm.
Um, so I feel like some could think of it as a physical place, and that could, with Squidward, that was like with time traveling thing. You could get another perspective, maybe between dimensions. It could be like with wormholes, and if you like fall out of the wormhole,
Mhm.
then like that's the void. Like you're not
Mhm.
supposed to be there.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's incredibly interesting. But it again, that could be either physical,
Mhm.
or you could think of it as more kind of psychological or even
Mhm.
philosophical.
Mhm.
So maybe not a place to go to, but maybe where you could end up mentally.
Mhm.
That could, yeah, you could continue.
That's actually that's an interesting interpretation because I think the void is different for everybody, and I think
Sure.
for Squidward, it's just like using that example. I feel like he wants to exist in a realm that SpongeBob does not exist in.
True.
So then he realizes once he has achieved this world, I guess you could call it, of where SpongeBob doesn't exist, where in his real life, pretty much his whole life and his whole schedule and his whole like what he does, it pretty much revolves around everything with SpongeBob. Like he works with
Hmm.
him, he lives next to him. His whole the whole show is about SpongeBob, but Squidward is incorporated in a lot of episodes. So
Yeah.
when you think about that of when he's entered a realm where SpongeBob doesn't exist, he basically entered a realm where it's the exact opposite. It's what he wanted, but at the same time, it's like you like be careful what you wish for type deal of like I don't want to be in a world where SpongeBob is. So he got that, and where his life revolved around nothing but him, now he has nothing because SpongeBob was his everything essentially. So that's something to think about. And it's like you get that, like you get what you wanted, and now it's like you have to live with that. You have to like deal with that because what if like SpongeBob moved away and like he just like didn't exist? His life
Hmm.
would be like essentially meaningless almost in
I,
like in some aspects, I guess you could
mhm.
say.
That brings up a really interesting point because, like, we were just touching on, like, psychologically.
Mhm.
If you, well, first let's talk about kind of you kind of need a challenge or something to work for in life.
Mhm.
Or, you either want something or you don't want something. And when you finally get it, you're like, all right, I'm here. Now what? That's almost with what Squidward went through with the void. Um, However, if you think of life itself, having that nothingness, that's what meaningless is, or
Mhm.
having no purpose or meaning. Like, you don't want to be there. And I feel like that's completely being in the void mentally. So I feel like you need something to
Mhm.
hold on to. So, like in Squidward's position, I like how we're analyzing this team. So in Squidward's situation, he might hate SpongeBob,
Mhm.
and you could look at it in your life. Like, you might hate, I don't know, your neighbors or your job or something. But you could think of it like a good and evil thing too. That if there's no good or no evil, then there's no opposite.
Mhm.
So if there's literally no anything, that's what it is.
Mhm.
It's really hard to explain nothingness.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
continue.
You brought up the idea of like if your whole world revolves around work or school. That's an interesting thought because it's like when we're in school, when we're in say elementary school and middle school just didn't happen in my mind. They just been extracted from my memory and I don't remember a single thing that happened prior to high school. But like high school and college, being in high school, I just remember just graduating and like in my situation, I was working all throughout high school and then all throughout college. So
Hmm.
that it like the transition into the real world, it kind of went like seamless in a way. But
Hmm.
I knew a lot of people that just didn't work while they were in high school, while they weren't in college and stuff like that. And when they graduated school, they were just released out into the real world and that you just have this moment of school was all you knew and now
Yeah,
you're out of it now and now you're like in nothingness essentially. So now you're just like,
true.
oh, I gotta go do something. So now you get a job. But I think that the same thing would happen while you're at a job. Let's say if you work for 40 years, whatever, and then you retire, you get out of work and now you're in the same position of all
Yes.
you did was work for 40 plus years, what have you, and now you're back in the void again because it's like work was all I did and now or you got fired and you just have like a lot of time to just do whatever. You realize how much time you have and it's like this was all I done and now that that's out of my life now, you're just like in nothingness
Hmm.
and just being amongst that. That's terrifying
That,
because like being trapped in that, like almost
yeah,
in like a negative space almost,
right.
that's you're like in between where you should be.
That brings up a really interesting story that I remember hearing from. There's some YouTube channels
Mhm.
like Creepypasta or Doctor No Sleep.
Yeah.
I want to say it's Creepypasta, but this is some. It was really interesting because it was a guy in a room,
Mhm.
and it was like a blank room, and he just like appeared there, and
Oh.
then he was there for days or whatever, but he was being fed. He was being like helped. Like, he tried to break out, so he was hurting himself. Then when he woke up, um, he was healed. So they were taking care of him. And then another at some random day, they gave him. There was a girl in the room.
Mhm.
So now they became a couple. They were giving them everything. It was all in this room, and I feel like, and they always wanted to get out though, because they
Mhm.
were confined.
Right.
And one, uh, I feel like somehow they eventually moved into like a bigger room, they had more space so they could live or whatever. But they eventually broke out, and they like fell down to, they were in the woods and everything. Now they're dirty, and they have to survive.
Mhm.
Um, and toward the end, she mentioned his name was Adam,
Hmm.
and what and that I remember it was very cool story. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, that was like an Adam and Eve. That was a religious thing
Mhm.
of Adam and Eve. You could think of it as you can have everything that you want, or not want, everything that you need,
Mhm.
but still you need something.
Mhm.
You need a purpose. So
Mhm.
going back to what you were talking about, yeah, life is a lot of pain and suffering,
Mhm.
but if there is no pain and suffering, then you wouldn't know what success or happiness or the opposite of that would be.
Mhm.
So if there's nothing, then you're just stuck in the void, meaninglessness, and
Mhm.
all that stuff. So I thought that story was actually really cool. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, like going back to of just nothingness, and being in that psychological mindset,
Mhm.
you need something. You need like purpose, because I feel like a lot of people, and they try to cover that by either being around other people, being like going places, hanging out, watching sports, and trying to fill up that gap. But
Mhm.
when they go home and they're just alone, they're back in that void.
Mhm.
I feel like you to break out of that, if you do believe that it is more um, psychological, you
Mhm.
need purpose there.
Yeah, that's that's deep. um,
It was such a cool story. I'm not
uh,
like a too religious person,
mhm.
but I feel like a lot more people should really look at more religious stories because they have deep meanings, and there's a
Mhm.
moral that comes from it.
Oh yeah, that's a very interesting story, and I think like that they were like trapped. Well, not trapped, but they were like, I guess when they were in between dimensions, I guess you could say that was like creation almost in a way.
Yeah.
So being like amongst that was that's interesting.
Hmm.
And I think like being in our own like personal prisons, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
It's it's a very real place, and I think our own personal prisons exist in our minds, but they're all in like different interpretations, like how we all just identify with it. You have the Squidward within the White Void. You have Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar, in between like time and stuff like that. You
Good
have the
point.
back rooms. You have like the concept of time travel, of just like where that there is no like present almost.
Hmm.
It's all it may not be a a tangible place, but it almost as if it is at the same time. Like it is and it isn't. It's a place that's like it's a place
It's
where
everywhere but nowhere.
yeah, it's like everything that is isn't anymore. It's like weird to describe. It's like the is not
Hmm.
like the nothingness is weird. And like
Hmm.
having our own personal prisons, that's interesting because I think I've encountered like a strong version of that prison when I moved from New York to North Carolina. That I was just in a house with no furniture, no paintings on the walls, or no, like no nothing, and I was just in this room.
You were in the
And,
void.
and I was like, aside from the mood lighting, just like this was just an absolute just white room, no furniture, no desk, no nothing, and I was literally just like job searching for like 3 months, and I just couldn't find anything. And there were times where I was just flat out just laying on the floor, just looking up at the ceiling, and I'm just like, you're trying to find like a purpose because you're in
Yeah.
a a, a state of mind. It's not even a place. It's a different state of mind. It was such a place that I never want to like return back to because like you said, like not having a purpose, that's that's so much more like it hurts on a like the pain is like on a so much more of a deeper level that it's not even physical anymore. It's just like
Mm.
it's mentally draining and it's like psychologically damaging and traumatizing and just what comes from that. It's some people return from it and some people don't, and
Yeah.
that's it's like actual prison. It's like some like you just come out differently. It's wicked stuff to
It is.
it's challenging to like think back to and try to imagine, but I think it's within all of us that it's not a place that's like this room or it's but it's like in here almost. It's
Definitely.
kind of like it's like the thought of like finding a purpose and like happiness and success. I think the concept, like trying to decipher the idea or the concept of the void, is like trying to analyze the the different renditions of happiness and success. It's like, oh, do you have a lot of money? That means you're successful. Or if you have a wife and a child and a house or what have you, are you must be happy then because you have a purpose for existing. You have a wife, you have a child, you have responsibilities, you have a house, a mortgage, and stuff like that. You're just looking for a purpose, and once you achieve that purpose, you would think like happiness and success would just come upon you, like the weight from your shoulders would just be lifted one day, and I don't think that's the case. I think like salvation, it's it's different for everyone. It's just like, oh, I may not have a lot of money, but I'm happy. So it's like, oh, does money equal success and happiness? And to me it doesn't. But I think the only thing about happiness is knowing when we're not in it. It's like,
Mm.
oh, I miss the old days. But when you look back to those old days, like when you were young and you were like you didn't have these struggles, you didn't have these responsibilities, you didn't have like all this stuff.
Yeah.
You were in happiness. You just didn't even know it. But now all happiness is now it's just knowing that you don't have it anymore. That you
Yeah.
had it, but now you can't go back. So it's like it can't be obtained again. And it's like we become like we start off as SpongeBob, but then we grow up into a Squidward almost. It's like we had it, but now here
Hmm.
we are. And it's you could tell I was when I was staring up at that ceiling, my mind just went. So so yeah.
That brought full circle. That went very well, actually. But you brought a lot of great points. Um,
As you
I
can
was
tell, I
writing
didn't
things,
fully come back.
and I'm still in this room.
I just got some furniture.
um, but yeah, a couple things I wanted to point out while you were speaking. So, like you were saying, when if you have no purpose, a couple examples. I'll use an easy one because everyone knows is Disney movies. And I think it's very dangerous if you fall into that trap. So basic, you could think of simply like happily ever after. You have to get married, and once you get that, or you slay the dragon or whatever, happiness just falls on you and that's it.
Mhm.
And it's not. And when you live through life, you realize that. And you get that next job, you get, I don't know, a bigger house, you get another car. And then when you finally obtain all those, usually they're things, um, you're like, if this is it, this is a problem. And
Mm.
there's an artist I really like. He's a rapper, NF. You might
Mhm.
have listened to a couple of songs,
Mhm.
but he talks about like he always wanted to be, top rapper, rapping in front of like tons of people, top
Mhm.
of the charts, and he got there. And he's like, I got everything I've ever wanted, and I still feel like this. And
Absolutely.
I feel like that's the psychological void,
Mhm.
kind of, that we are all dealing with. And I don't know why, but I love quotes. um, but this one quote, like we have all heard of it. I never thought deeply about it till recently. But it's ignorance is bliss.
Yes. Oh
And
yeah.
for like when we were in school, I like heard of it. I'm like, I don't know what that means, but all right, cool. It sounds neat. But as I learn more,
Mhm.
as you become more knowledgeable about life and problems and everything, the more responsibilities you take on.
Mhm.
And if you think back to not knowing that stuff,
Mm.
it was much easier. There's a lot of stupid happy people out there.
Mm.
A lot of them. And sometimes I wish I was one of them
Mm.
because of all the stuff that bombards you because you think about especially at this deep level. But at the same time, they're scared because they don't want to look there. They
Mhm.
don't want to look at like, oh, I don't have purpose. They want to fill it with meaningless stuff so they don't have to look in that direction.
Mhm. I think for me, I think um there's a lot of there's a lot of key points. But for me, I think what life essentially is, it's just basically you have to bombard your life with just endless coping mechanisms, I guess you could say. It's just like going back to what you said, it's like, oh, you have this level you want to get to, but then you're like your whole once you get there, you're just like, I still feel like this, and now you what like you're just like, well, what's next? Because that seems so unobtainable. Now that you have it, it's just like, well, now what? And then you get disappointed again. It's like ordering a package from Amazon, and the whole excitement and the whole thrill is it coming today? Is it coming today? And then it doesn't one day, and then you're just like, I really wish it came today, but it didn't. But and it comes like a day or two later, and you're so excited because you're building up all this like suspense and stuff, and then you finally get it, and then you open it, you're just like, sometimes it's like this is something else, and or it's like a Toby Maguire, but sometimes it's like you get it and you're like, okay, cool. And like the thrill is it just plummets. And it's
Yeah.
just like it's gone. It's just like, okay, I guess I'll go order something else because that feeling that I was feeling,
Yeah.
that was exciting. That was fun. I want to like
Mhm.
keep having that. So like not having a purpose, that it's not having that thrill. It's not having that something to look forward to. So I think
Antici-
um with filling your life with coping mechanisms. It's just like, oh, I want to be happy one day, so I'll get a high paying job, or I'll get a girlfriend, or I'll get a boyfriend, and they will make me happy. I get a high paying job. That means I could do a lot more things. I could buy more things. I could go more places. I could eat more expensive food. I could drive a more expensive car. I could live in a more expensive house. But once you get those things, it's just like
hmm,
you just want more and more and more.
yeah.
And we just keep filling our lives with coping mechanisms to make the pain and the suffering, we it's it's inevitable, but we keep delaying it, or we keep diluting it, pretty much, because
Hmm.
that's essentially what life is. It's just delaying the inevitable. But in that time of living, you have to fill your life with happiness or purpose. But
Hmm.
happiness in this dimension, at least through my perspective, a lot of it is primitive and temporary. So with most people, you just have to keep adding more stuff. I got to get a nicer car. I got to get a bigger house. I got to do all these things. But essentially, you're back in that personal prison.
Yeah.
It's that no matter if you have a wife, you have a dog, you have a child, house, car, job, you're still up here, and you can't escape that. And
Hmm.
that's terrifying. And I like the the greatest hell is isolation. And I
It
think
is.
we have to keep, or not feeling wanted, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically have to keep lying to ourselves, essentially, that I'm not like this. I don't feel like this. But like you said, if like you do, like you go out to the bar with your friends and you drink and you do stuff like this, and you come home and you're laying on the floor again, staring up at the ceiling, because it's all temporary. The high comes down, the friends go home, the money gets spent. Like it's all temporary, and
Hmm.
it's back to like, what is the purpose?
Hmm.
And and you're back in that personal void again.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a way to think about a lot of things are temporary, and people don't like that. That's how people get addicted to a lot of different things. And
Mm.
that's dangerous because they try to find that good feeling that they can't hold on to ever.
That high
And that,
always comes down.
yeah, that's fair. And like, I'm glad that we're able to see that and acknowledge it, because if you don't, that's really dangerous
Mhm.
because you'll do anything to chase it. And at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter.
Mhm.
Um,
With like, I think the most addictive drug in the world is money, and
yeah,
it you would approach a family member, or a lifelong friend, that you would just die for, or you would jump in a bullet for, or like you think your trust in this person is like so loyal, and it's like so definitive, and it's like it's unbreakable. But as soon as you just dangle money in front of them, the person that they could possibly become would even blow someone's mind, to the
that's
point it's
true.
like, how did I think you were this person? And it's crazy
That's
to
really
think about.
interesting. That's true. I mean, if you think about, like, people probably ask each other this all the time, like, what would you do for $1 million? And you would probably do a lot.
Hmm.
But like, what makes it unethical at that point?
Like, I would do
Um,
most things for
but
about like
I
$1,000.
That's a lot of 4 for 4s.
Wendy's,
Um,
bro. Wendy's is killing it right now. Side note, tangent.
um, but yeah, a couple things. So talking about like money and possessions of having, let's say you want a Lambo. Um,
Lambo.
so think about, all right, how to describe this. Let's say someone is wanting to have a Lambo. They work, whatever, years and years and years to get. They finally get it, right? Now they have it,
Mhm,
and then, they plateau and they're like, all right, now what?
mhm,
If you see that and you're like, hey, I'm content with what I have, you don't have to go through that, and you're on the same level. And
mhm.
when I realized that one day, I'm like, that's really interesting. Like, you could have that same excitement for a Toyota Camry, you know.
They're
But
reliable.
going,
You know,
They are, yo, Toyotas and Hondas,
it's like
but
it's like driving an empty green beans can, but it's reliable.
um, but go, go going back to happiness and looking back at it. I don't know. This was like an epiphany for me one day. That, like you said, you looked back and you saw that you had happiness, and you talked about this before. But what if look? Let's look in the future, looking back to today,
Mhm,
looking like you had happiness, and right now you don't realize it.
mhm,
When I realized that, I'm like, wow.
mhm,
So, and that's the problem because a lot of people look in the past that they were happy, or the future that they're gonna be happy. They never look at now,
mhm. I
and I
think we
think that's
always
very dangerous.
I think we always dream of being a version of ourselves that is always not in the present. Like, I think we're always in the
Mm,
mindset that we're in this present person, this present version of ourselves, that we could always be something better one day. And like in the future, something like that, or I'll retire one day, and then you actually do retire one day, and it's like, what do? You just pull up a freaking fold chair in front of the front door and just wait
for the
for
male.
just wait for the mail, or just like wait for stuff to come by so you can complain about it. It's like, look, just looking at stuff just driving by. It's
Yeah.
like
Hi,
like
mailman.
it's just like doing a puzzle. Like that's like, oh, I don't want to work anymore. I just want to sit home. And it's like, if like, say you're in between jobs, like I was a few months ago, and it's like, oh, I just want to sit home and just whatever. That's all well and good for like the first couple of days, but when you approach like weeks and months of just being home alone, and it's so hot outside you can't even go out to get your mail because you'll come back sweating and you already took a shower this morning, like, being in that, there's no purpose again. Like,
Yeah.
oh my, it's after images. Vietnam
Uh,
flashbacks.
but no, that's you're completely right. It's that purposeless and meaninglessness
Mhm.
that we human beings just don't like.
Yeah, we're returning back to the void, which is the personal prison in our heads that's different for all of us, but essentially the whole meaning of the void is the same thing for all of us. It's
Yeah.
that first layer of hell, that isolation, that limbo that we just don't want to be in. You think the most in-depth interpretation of hell is like eternal suffering and stuff like that, but I think instead of just being like in the second circle or the ninth circle, it's just that having no purpose, being in that limbo state, that just experiencing that far surpasses any kind of physical pain that you could ever endure, because
Yeah.
that's psychological. And like,
That's
when it comes to
yeah.
like methods of, like, say, torture, for example, you would think like, oh, more pain, we'll get more information, like a confession and stuff, when really the most effective way of punishment is self-isolation, and just like white room torture. I think that's like, I
That's
think
messed up.
method in like Europe or like Russia, I don't know, could be completely, but just you're placed in a white room, everything's white, there's no shadows, there's no perception of, there's no depth perception, there's no shadows, there's no perception of time. Like, you don't know if you slept for 20 minutes or 8 hours. Like,
Yeah.
you just lose yourself. And that's scary when you have that feeling of you're not in control anymore.
That
that
too.
that's 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 more damaging than anything.
Hmm.
be physically inflicted.
That is true. I feel like, yeah, isolation is something like, I mean, there's two types. There's introverts and extroverts.
Mm.
Extroverts love other people, obviously. Introverts, you know, uh,
Oh,
I'm definitely one. Yeah, we're both introverts. So, sometimes we would be like, I could deal without people for quite a bit.
mm.
And you probably could. But there's a point where it's bad.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And yeah, I feel like, so going back to what you're talking about, like with retirement, of like, oh, once you retire, I'm going to do nothing. I don't think, like, maybe for a week, sure, but I
Hmm.
don't think so. And even recently with everything going on, we have to isolate for it. It started for 2 weeks, and everyone's like, maybe not the extroverts, but some people were like, that's great by me. Then, and unfortunately, I feel a lot of people don't talk about mental health. We don't know about it much, mostly because it's not covered by insurance and it's really expensive, and people don't go to, um, it's incredibly important. And people just got, and this wasn't even bad. This was like a taste of isolation.
Yeah.
Imagine like actually being in that void.
Yeah.
Um,
I think a good example from like my perspective, I guess like when I was a private investigator for 3.5 years, I've reached a point where like I did like stakeouts, like pretty much in a nutshell, as weird as it is to say, I stalked people. That out of context, that
for my
sounds
employment.
ridiculous. Yeah, like I follow people for like insurance purposes. Don't worry, like it was legitimate. There was a reason for me being there, but um, I just reached like doing that, sitting in your car for 6, 8, sometimes even 12 hours of just waiting outside someone's house. That sounds so bad, but like just sitting in the car, and when I reached that point of like when I got to like that 3-year mark, and I was approaching that like 3.5 years, I hit that point of just I forgot how to talk to people. Like I had no social interaction for the past 3 years, and when I like came across people again, it's just like they were like aliens to me. It was so weird. Like you try meeting people, you try going on dates, and it's just like you don't know what to say, because it's just like, what do you say? What have you been doing for the past 3.5 years? And that's just nothing but just sitting there, just a drastic example for me. It's you're just living death essentially.
Mhm.
Like you're just in this state of mind that's just different, and it's a place that exists up here, and it keeps coming back. It's
Yeah, it's a good point.
crazy
I had
stuff.
to let my dog out. That's what happened. But going back to, I want to focus on specific examples about the void that you mentioned a little bit ago with Interstellar
Mm,
and the back rooms.
yes.
Um, so if you want to touch on those, because a lot of people probably haven't heard of the back rooms, but with Interstellar, with the dreamy Matthew McConaughey, um, he so highly recommend, one of my favorite movies.
Oh yes.
So he fell into a black hole, and I mean that this movie was really scientifically accurate.
Yes.
Not because I'm a scientist. A lot of scientists are like, no, that was pretty good, up until the black hole push. No one knows that. So he falls into a black hole, and he goes between dimensions.
Mm,
So, like you said, that could be looked at as the void
hmm.
in
Or
the
a version of it.
movie. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's so many different versions. Um, but how they described it was he was in, and similar to the void, there's no beginning, there's no end, time doesn't
Hmm.
exist.
Hmm.
But let's say he was in the fourth dimension, but because we can't conceive that, with our human minds
Mhm.
or brains, um, that whoever create or the masters or creators of the fourth dimension manifested the dimension in three dimensions so that he could understand it.
I see. So
So
basically,
that's how he has to come in. Um,
so
so
basically he was in the fourth dimension, I guess.
so how they described it. So technically, he wasn't necessarily in between. It,
Mhm.
you know, there's so many different perspectives. It's all very interesting. How they described it, he fell into the fourth dimension. Fourth dimension is time. There's no beginning, there's no end.
Mhm.
So later in the movie, they describe. Spoiler alert.
The
Sorry, a
movie's
little
been
late.
out, guys.
You should have seen it already. Um, but later they describe it. They were higher beings, so they just like they were humans in the future that were at a higher dimension, so they were able to control the fourth dimension. So they manipulated the fourth dimension. It's getting deep. They adjusted the fourth dimension into a three-dimensional perception so we could understand. Which is why he saw his life in
It was like
like a
a
time span
yeah,
because
yeah.
there's no beginning, no end. So if you're in the fourth dimension, you can see you could go back to birth to death and you could relive that over and over and over again because there's no time. You choose where you want to be in that timeline. And that's what that void-esque place in Interstellar was described as,
Hmm.
to the best of my
Eh,
non-expert knowledge.
oh yes,
Gotta put that
completely not expert knowledge.
in.
I have an associate's degree.
Oh, who am
um,
I?
that's yeah. That was such a moment. Like you and me, and we're in the theater, and it was like such like I was just like just drawn to this film because it was like so. First off, it was so emotionally draining. Like it was like you had to pay attention to it the entire time. So
Yeah.
I'm like, this is like delving into the mind of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and it's just like I am not smart enough to keep up right now. So you're just like you're sitting there and you're watching it because if you go do anything else, you're done. You are gone. There's not a chance that you're gonna just like to keep up with everything.
Yeah.
And it was like when he reached that in between dimensions, entering the fourth, it was like such a you're just like this is something we're not supposed to be seeing. Like this is not
Experiencing, yeah.
this is something that's beyond our comprehension. And it's basically like he was probably in a realm that was so beyond our reasoning and our imagination that what he was seeing was probably what it was not, but it's the only version of it that his mind can comprehend. It's
Mhm.
like Pennywise. Like
Yeah.
it's his real form is something we can't comprehend. Like he eats worlds and children. I don't know. Like it's his real form is like so beyond our reasoning and beyond our comprehension that he takes a form that that's the only form we can grasp
Yeah.
because the real form it's like we can't even see it or like it would just like melt our minds or something
That-
like that.
That's a good point. So if taking that aspect, something called a tesseract. You
Mm,
ever heard that? It's a fourth. Again, no professional or expert. It's a fourth dimensional shape. There's no way because you could look it up on YouTube. Like, oh, tesseract. So while it rotates, you could see that it's like morphing, but it's not. So it's difficult to explain. But let's say if you take a line, right? That's one dimension. If you take
two lines and connect.
two lines and connect them with perpendicular lines, That's a square.
Hmm.
That's two-dimensional. So
Yep.
if you take a square, I have some paper, but if you take a
Visual
square,
representation.
take a square with another square and connect them with perpendicular lines. I don't know if you can see. That would be a cube.
Hmm.
So that's the third dimension.
Hmm.
A fourth dimension is taking two cubes and connecting them with perpendicular lines. That's what a tesseract is. So you could look it up on YouTube. They rotate it, and it's trippy. It's so cool. Um, but we can't comprehend it. It looks like it's morphing because we just can't understand it. That's the best way to explain it. I got that example from Neil deGrasse Tyson because he's smarter than me.
Oh yeah.
um,
Love you, Neil.
I love to talk with. He's an incredible person to talk to. But he says like, I lay awake at night that because there are just some things you'll never understand,
Mm.
and that's frustrating.
Oh yeah.
Like, will we ever understand fourth dimension stuff? I don't know. I hope so.
But are we supposed to understand it? Is it our
That's big.
place in
Yeah.
this universe for our minds to comprehend? Like, what makes you think we're so special that it was created for us to comprehend? We were placed in
True.
the third because our infant brains can only process three-dimensional things. It's just like, okay, when they got to the fourth, they confuse easily. Let's just keep them in the third, and here we are.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think we, as humans, we think ourselves are more important than we actually are.
When you realize how minuscule we are compared to the rest of the universe, dude, we can't even get to Mars, our neighbor planet. Like it's just like thinking like understanding it's like a like Jupiter, I think it is. They have like two skies. It's like the second sky.
Oh,
It like
they
rains
have multiple
acid,
atmosphere. Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I'm just like, you're telling me they got two weather channels, like that, like the or like the sky above the first set of clouds rains acid, and by the time it hits the ground, it like doesn't, and it's like
Oh, it might.
I don't
I
even
might.
like.
I might be wrong, but like, yeah, the top atmosphere might rain acid.
Mhm.
Then the bottom atmosphere might like fall into like glass shards or something.
That's a problem.
So that's something.
Mm.
So when you think of that compared to like Earth weather, it's really
Oh yeah,
nothing.
I decided to stop watching the Weather Channel because it's like
Such a waste of time.
it's always the same and nothing ever happens. Even if they say there's a tornado warning, it never comes. It's like, dude,
Well,
if
that
the
depends where
weather
you live.
if if the weather is that severe, you will get an Amber Alert, and that's where you could adjust accordingly. Like just watching the news and the weather, it's pretty much pointless at this time. It's like, oh, is it gonna rain? If it's gonna rain, it's
Let it
gonna
be.
rain. Like, it's like, what are you gonna do about it? It's like, oh, I was gonna go on a picnic today, and now we can't. You weren't going on no damn picnic. Like, oh man, now I have to work around it. Like, no, like we're all going to work. Like how does it affect our lives in any sense? You pull up the convertible freaking roof, like that's the extent of it. Like, whether it is not that bad here compared to other planets is what I'm
No,
getting
we
at.
got it. We got it pretty good. Yeah.
Of just going off of what's going on Mars, what's going on the sun with solar flares. What's Jupiter's deal? Here, they're just like, oh no, it's raining, it's drizzling, and it's just like, man, if go to work, like like, no, the rain was horrible, the traffic was horrible. Like they're talking about things that we have no control over. It's like you're talking about nothing. Like it's just like that's why like small talk for me was always challenging because conversations to me, it's like I have to get something from it
Yeah.
for us to have this conversation. If you talk about things that like you have no control over or that just has no effect on like very little things,
Yeah.
it's just like why talk about them essentially?
Hmm.
That's just me. It's
I, yeah.
like conversation
I,
should be like,
sorry.
let's very, very strong and very important question. Batman or Superman? Just to start. Aliens? No. Just like topics like that. But like I think people they talk about things like that, it's because it's something we all not connect with, but it's something we all encounter, I guess you could say.
It's unjudgmental.
It's safe. And I
Yeah.
think that's why people talk about that kind of stuff because talking about stuff like this, it's like you go into a gas station to get your Doritos or your Takis, and you're just like, so I've been thinking about aliens and like how they could probably look. You're looking straight into the cashier's eyes, and you're just like, what do you think that they're 3 foot big eyes, little green people? He would he wouldn't even he wouldn't even like check out your Doritos. He would be like, yo, you can't get out. Like I also need gas, and he ain't putting, you know what I mean? Like you can't just like talk about this kind of stuff because it scares people, and
That's
like ignorance is bliss. So they rather talk about safe things
that's true.
because this kind of
I
stuff is challenging.
I just thought of if you replace small talk with like deeper things, you can't do like you can't go up to a random person. What do you think of multidimensional beings? Like what? Who are you?
That can't be your
That's how you
opening
get
line.
arrested. But
Like that's that's how you end up in a room with guys asking you questions.
that's how you
Guys
get
in
straight
suits
jacketed.
asking you questions.
So,
Who
um,
told you?
so we I want to touch on Jordan Peterson. I really like the guy. He's very intellectual. But he brought up. I never thought about this with small talk because I hate small talk too. I feel like a lot of people do, but I feel like small talk should. I mean, it does exist, but it's there for you to almost gauge the person, how they are, how they're feeling, to then move further. You
Mhm,
shouldn't stay at small talk because that it goes nowhere.
mhm,
So if you start with, stupid little things and then you kind of build rapport with each other, that's how you get deeper. And
mhm.
I'm like, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, but then when put into execution, it's just like
Well,
you talking to
not that
some
everyone does that, but
you're talking to some random girl on the street, and you're just like, oh, so like 101 conversation. So, what's your favorite color? And she like tases you or something, like because that's too in depth for some people nowadays, you know. But like, yeah, getting like that like that trust with people, that's hard to obtain
that's
because
not a quick thing.
yeah, it's something you have to grow with. But most people they don't have like the mental stamina to like think about this kind of stuff, let alone talk about it. So like bringing it up, it's just like you like scare them off, and they like they just stop talking to you completely.
That's true. It's scary for them. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
like it's not scary. I don't even want to call it challenging. It's something that's like that's what it should be. Like that's like what we're talking about right now. Like this to me would be small talk, and what people think small talk is you're talking about nothing. So I'm like,
Yeah.
why are you wasting your breath right now? Like this right here is like small talk to me because look at how it just builds and look how it just daisy chains off of each other. It just becomes something, and we're learning so much about each other. Like this is what
That's
talking to
true.
people should be, not the weather, not traffic. and not I'm gonna retire one day. Like that's not what talking is. Like this is what talking is, and that's why.
That's true. Oh, that's a whole other topic because like we're so. I mean, look at TikTok. Our attention spans are 2 seconds. So
Oh
if
yeah,
you go any longer than that, but that's what's required to understand each other, and that's why we do this podcast with critical thinking. But um, we've been going for an hour. We might want to wrap it up. However, I can't because we touched on it. Um, and a lot of people could be interested in it. If we want to just go back to the void, talk about the back rooms. This
Mm.
could be our last talking
La-
point.
this is the conclusion. This is the rising action. Don't worry, the climax is coming. The back rooms, yo, there are so many videos. This is how what introduced me to like creepypasta and Dr. No Sleep. Love those channels. I listen to them when I fall asleep every night. And also like ASMR stuff, but that's just my personal gains. Anyway, but the back rooms, that that be trippy. That is stuff that's just it's like it's something that's like you it's a realm that we could just comprehend, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It
So
like it
what's
just makes
your
sense.
understanding of it? Like how was it described to you? I'm pretty sure we probably saw the same video, but like how would you describe it?
Basically, it's you somehow get into this what looks like an endless hallway, or not a hallway, but like endless mindless patternless rooms that are just
It's
endless, and
it's
they're
almost like a
like
hotel or like an office, but like an abandoned office building.
yeah, it's like a very
Yeah.
monotoned, very like very familiar but almost alien like vibe
That's
to it. I don't know
terrifying.
how else other to describe it. It's like the walls have patterns in it, but the patterns are like in such a way that's like they're like eerie enough to be like
Hmm.
if you look at them long enough, it's just like where are you? So you just like
Where? Yeah.
keep going, but it's like endless. And I think there's like layers or floors, but it's like nearly impossible to get to either. I don't know. It's trippy.
Yeah.
What were you told?
How I what I remember from the story, and there's probably a lot of different stories of how you get in there. It could be like a glitch in the the matrix or the system or dimension, and you just fall into this void esque area.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, you're like alone. There's nothing, and you either stay there
mm,
or try to move forward. And if you move forward, then it gets. I don't know how you get to different layers.
mm.
I'm right. I don't know why. I'm just thinking of like Doom. Just first person going to the walls, and then you go to the next level, and then the walls just change. Um, but different levels, however you get to them, they have like maybe a different creature that you have to watch out for. Like you can't look them in the eye or something, and at a certain level, they'll just
Mhm.
devour you or something.
I think there's like like different levels as you said, and I think there's like monsters that come after you or whatever, like different
Yeah,
celestial Lovecraftian
I was about to
monster,
say
like
Lovecraft.
just abominations, whatever. But I also heard like those monsters, those are people that were also trapped there that
Oh,
just became that because they've been there that long. You know what I mean?
yo,
Like that kind of like your like body just transforming like sick stuff,
wow, that just opened up a whole other conversation.
right?
Because if, real quick, if you think about it, if you're in that mental void, what you turn into,
Yes.
like even
Is
like in this world, you could turn into some like a monster if you're too deep in that void in your mind.
yes. So I don't think there like is an escape from that. So you just become just madness, really. Like
Mm.
your mind falls to madness, so you you become it essentially.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know if it's like the same void for like different people, but it's like if it's like endless, I would imagine if it's like anything like dimensions, it's like anything is possible. So I think that would be like the personal prison that I think we can, like our personal prisons are all different to each other, but I think that's one that we all share. Like that's
That's a good
one
way to
that we
put it.
could all,
Relate to.
yes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I see it. It's a personal prison that we could all get to,
Yeah.
that we could all share.
Yeah.
It's crazy stuff.
And
Mhm.
that's what we talk about here in the void.
And that's what we're about here.
And that's level one.
And that's limbo. Tune in for layer 2, where there's crazy windstorms. Anybody
But
that
yeah, I think
read Dante's Inferno got that.
but yeah, I think that was great. We touched on a lot of different things. It worked pretty well. I feel like the next, so yeah, a lot of weird, mysterious topics that we want to touch on. Next one we talked a little bit about. I feel like we'll probably go into dreams next,
Oh yeah,
and
that
I
could,
feel that's an interesting chapter two to the void.
yeah, what they mean, what they could mean, and it's like why we have them in the first place. Of like,
Yeah,
is it simulations that our brain creates for us, or is it like heaven and we're getting sneak peeks into it, like that kind of stuff.
yeah. No, that's a really interesting topic.
We're all dreaming, everyone, and when you die, you go to your dreamland.
But yeah, so that's into the void topic of the void number one, and we'll have to work on some type of outro, but we'll get there. That's fine.
Wait, oh yeah, but this is what we're gonna, this is what how we're gonna go. I'm not Nick, and he's not Dan. Reverse those. That's who we are. This is Into the Void. Thanks for tuning in. Stay weird.